Tēnā tātou, ngā mihi o te wā. Welcome everybody. Thanks for your time this morning. Online we have Tuhiao at the moment, and I'd formally like to welcome Eric to the Policy and Planning Committee meeting, Mayor Phil and everybody else who's made the effort to be here today. Tēnā koutou. We have an apology from Grant and also Dion Luke. May I have a mover for those apologies, please? Thank you, John. Thank you, Susan. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Kia ora. Moving on to confirmation of the last minutes on the 10th of February. Gee, that doesn't seem like that long ago, but it is, isn't it? May I have a mover and a seconder for those minutes, please? Thank you, Neil. Seconder. Thank you, Jonathan. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Kia ora. Moving on to item 5, policy and planning update, handing over to the team.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
I'm assuming I can take the paper as read.
Yes.
But a couple of highlights or comments. The first thing is that we've talked about complete, and we're 75% complete. I just really want to comment that the notion of completeness is a little bit rubbery now that things have changed, and they continue to change even more so. In the past, that notion of completeness was based around having a chapter that was written basically and agreed, a set of rules. We're not really in a position to have an agreed set of rules or even know what the framework is for the rules. So what we're looking for in relation to each of our topics is more, we know what the issues are, we understand the options, we've agreed on a set of, we've talked to internally and with Butaio and with key stakeholders, and we have a good understanding of the different perspectives in relation to the options that we have on the table. That, and in relation to where we are for each of those topics that are in the appendix, we're not too far away from that on any of them. And one of the key things that we have looked to do since the beginning of this year is actually go back to Butaio. And in many cases, that is actually the key step. And last Monday, not yesterday, the day before, the week before, we started again with a Butaio conversation, which is all about just kind of catching up with where we're at in relation to each of the topics. And we agreed at that meeting that we would do that on a monthly basis, a regular basis, alternating face-to-face and online. And that would basically become a space for an ongoing conversation about what we're doing in relation to policy matters. We have because we've had a bit of a break since Plan Stop in terms of conversation, we have a bit of catch up to do. So we're going through each topic and saying, this is where we got to, this is what we heard last time we talked to you, what do you want to do now? Do you want to have more conversations? Are there things that you want more detail about? How do you want to do it? Or are you happy to set it down and wait for national direction? Because in many cases, national direction is key to actually understanding what we need to put in the plan as opposed to what might be a good non-regulatory approach. So as a whole, in the policy team, we're taking a broader approach of saying what are the regulatory and non-regulatory approaches that we should be thinking about in relation to each topic, and that so that when we understand the legislation, we will understand what needs to be regulatory and what can be non-regulatory. And that in actual fact, the new legislation looks like it will require us to actually document that. So we will be in a good position. So that's the first thing, is that completeness is not necessarily what it was before in relation to reporting. We have, I mean, the ideal parking point we said was a section 32, which is an RMA place where you actually say this is where we've arrived at and these are the costs and benefits of that approach that we've agreed. That's based on having a set of rules though. So if we haven't already drafted a set of rules, I'm not proposing that we actually get into detailed rule drafting at this stage for any topic where we haven't already done that. And we have done that on quite a number of topics. The in terms of the Patayo, that's the key step forward in terms of reinvigorating that conversation. We will be hoping to share knowledge, for instance, the outputs of the science program that have not, then that's something that they haven't been aware of. Fish passage is a key one that we can make some progress on. We have existing statutory obligations, so we had a talk about that. We also had a talk about the cultural lens on water, and whether we need to have some more conversations about that because that might become a little bit more ambiguous in the new legislation. So that's we need to decide what that looks like together and have that conversation about cultural values, which Maria has already started, but we need to extend that and think about how that integrates with our regulatory and non-regulatory approaches. We've also made quite a lot of progress on the farming strategy. I call it farming strategy. It's about that integrated approach to farming practices that we have an internal working group. We're trying to align our internal position on best farming practices. And when thinking about that, you also need to realise that that's actually managing the activity, and on the other side is water quality. It's all about fresh water. We're still very much totally engaged in fresh water. And then, of course, we're also totally engaged in spatial planning, and in supporting the rest of the organisation through things like the biosecurity strategy review. So that's really all I wanted to say. If you have any questions.
Neil.
Yes, I'd just like to ask two questions, or really one together, which is that we've obviously got the national directions coming. Do we have any indication when that might be? And the other thing is, yesterday there was a presentation in the media by the Associate Minister of Agriculture about farm plans, and saying that his farm plan progress has been made, a strong progress as he's been announced. Would that impinge on what we do? Because it could be that they're going to put more responsibility onto farm plans than what we necessarily do.
Through you, Chair. Freshwater farm planning regulations are still out there. They haven't arrived. They've been coming for some time, and they're probably not going to arrive anytime soon. So freshwater farm plans are a thing. That they're also a potential delivery mechanism for the Natural Environment Plan as part of the Natural Environment Bill. I'm not sure that we would expect anything much before the actual bills themselves, the other bills, the Natural Environment Bill. In relation to timelines for national direction, we're not really expecting national direction, spatial planning by the end of the year, but on natural environment matters probably, the first quarter next year. So there's quite a gap in time, yeah.
Thank you. Donna, and then Tuhia.
I was just wondering who you're consulting with. You've got your internal farming plan, and so who are you consulting with outside in the farming industry? Because you talked about consulting with stakeholders.
Yeah, that we haven't got there yet, but we will be. Yeah, we're looking at how we might do that as part of the work that we're doing at the moment.
Okay. Tuhia, kaya koe.
Hi, morena koutou. Yeah, just thank you for this report. It was really nice to see everything kind of pulled together. Great comments. You talked about the cultural lens, and I think that's really important right now, particularly. Just want to note that federated farmers are coming out quite hard against iwi and their social media around cultural assessments with consents and things like that. So it would be really good to have the council helping us explain to farmers why these things need to happen. The second thing is it would be really good, maybe even today, to have a verbal update on what's happening with the council merge with NPDC and the other councils potentially. I did send an email to Steve and others about having hui separately, but if there was time for a quick verbal update today, that would be great. And so the last thing is just, given what's happening at the moment with Iran and the US and oil prices and things, I'm just wondering if council can do something about public transport, because we're seeing numbers rising really quickly. And we've got these changes happening on 7th of April, but from what I can see, TRC aren't really having meetings anymore, and we need some kind of emergency response. And that also should roll out perhaps with your own staff on vehicles and petrol costs. And the same with our farming sector, because it's going to hit farmers hard. So just wondering if there's any update on this. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Any response?
Two of those items are outside the scope of this meeting agenda, and look, I'm happy to engage with Tuhia offline on both of those items.
Okay.
And obviously, Anne can comment on the first issue, which was planning. Your first question, Tuhia, was about the planning piece?
The cultural impact.
Cultural impact work?
Yeah, feds.
Feed farmers.
So this is not in yours, it's here. So through you, Richard, we do use cultural impact assessments on major take consents and involve coming to figure on that. So we do have an open mind to that. I have a lot of experience in it, and these can work in terms of sharing values and getting different values recognised as part of the overall consideration. So we're not opposed to those as long as they're required in the first place and the costs associated with them are reasonable. So, and applicants don't have issues with that.
Ka pai Tuhia.
I couldn't quite grasp that last bit. You just said that you're happy to do that.
Sorry,
Sorry, can I just clarify? I think Tuhia was looking for more council, correct me if I'm wrong, more council help in promoting the value of the cultural impact statements rather than council justifying why we do impacts. Does that make sense? So just helping to promote why cultural impact statements happen, sure, and their value to the process.
Yep.
In response to what has been seen as an increased anti-impact statement sentiment coming through on social media. Would that be correct? Okay, so can we leave it with?
Leave it with me.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to talk with you directly around the matter.
Okay. And Steve will get back to you about your other kōrero too. You're fine. Thank you. Any other comments, councillors? Committee members? No? If that's the case, can I please have someone recommend that we receive the memo and note the progress achieved to date as per our, thank you, Neil, seconder. Thank you, Lee. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? That's carried. Kia ora. Moving on to, oh, sorry, my diligence. Tab 6, Freshwater Microbial Research Program 2020 to 2025. Thank you.
While Thomas is coming up to speak to the item, this is an overview of a national research program that TRC has been involved in over a period of time from 2023 to 2025, revisiting some of the science that sits behind the guidelines for things like content recreation. So, to you, Thomas. Thanks, Abby.
Thanks, Abby. Morena tato. So, yeah, Abby's provided a pretty good starter on what this item's all about. I just wanted to acknowledge Angela Collins, our water quality scientist, who prepared this memorandum but wasn't able to be here to present this morning. So we know people can get sick from swimming or wading in rivers when fecal contaminants are present. This is one of the reasons why regional councils monitor recreational water quality during the summer months as part of their Can I Swim Here programs. However, we don't usually measure the disease-causing pathogens directly because it's expensive and impractical. Instead, we use E. coli as an indicator or warning signal in freshwater. This research program has updated the science behind those warning signals, helping us to better understand how much risk people are actually exposed to. So researchers work with regional councils and iwi and hapu to select 71 sites across New Zealand for inclusion in the program, including 9 sites in Taranaki. Sites were deliberately chosen where fecal contamination was known or likely, so the study captured a full range of water quality conditions. Water samples were collected over 4 years across different seasons and flow conditions, and in Taranaki, the sampling was carried out in partnership with Pukerangi Ora and Aotearoa Hapu. Each water sample was analysed in the lab for several things, including the indicator bacteria, so that's the E. coli, as well as the actual pathogens. So that includes bacteria like Campylobacter, protozoa like Giardia and Cryptosporidium, and others. Source tracking markers were also tested, so those tests look for the genetic signals to indicate where the fecal contamination likely came from, whether it was livestock, birds, or humans. And environmental DNA, or eDNA, was also tested to help identify what animals were present in and around the river catchment. So this all culminated in around 1,000 water samples being collected across the country and compiled into a national data set. The researchers then examined how often the pathogens were detected, how pathogen presence related to E. coli levels, the indicator, and how contamination sources varied by site, season, and conditions. The final step in all of this was the development of a quantitative microbial risk assessment, or a QMRA. So this is a statistical model that estimates how much water people might swallow while swimming, how many pathogens might be present, and how likely that exposure is to result in infection or illness. The model runs thousands of simulations to reflect real-world variability in swimming behaviour, water quality, and pathogen levels. So what do the findings tell us? E. coli is still a useful indicator, especially for predicting Campylobacter risk, but it does not reliably predict the presence of protozoa like Giardia or Cryptosporidium. Pathogens were often found even when E. coli met the current guidelines. This was not unexpected given that the guidelines are designed to manage an acceptable level of risk, not eliminate the risk entirely. This means that there's no such thing as zero risk when swimming in rivers. Even at low E. coli levels, the study found a small chance of illness. As E. coli increases, the risk increases, but above very high levels, it tends to level off. Human contamination can increase the risk even further due to the presence of human-specific pathogens such as norovirus. Due to the updated modelling approach, the current illness estimates are not directly comparable with the previous national study that informed the original guidelines back in 2003. The earlier model allowed for a zero risk outcome at low E. coli levels, whereas the updated model better reflects the current scientific understanding that zero risk does not exist in natural freshwaters. The current study expands on the earlier work by providing estimates of illness risk in addition to infection risk. Infection rates and illness rates are different measures given that not everybody who gets infected will become ill. So if we look at the results from the current study, during the summer months, at times when E. coli levels are at the action threshold, which is red on the traffic light and is considered unsafe for swimming, the associated percentage of swims that are estimated to result in infection was 7%, with 3% of swims estimated to result in illness. In the previous study, the estimated infection risk was lower at 2.5%. Infection and illness risks at given E. coli thresholds were higher when examining the year-round data as opposed to just the data across the summer swimming months. So the results from the Taranaki sites contributed to the development of the national model and those outputs I just mentioned, but the microbial source tracking results specifically also provide useful information on site-specific factors affecting water quality in our rivers and streams. There are limitations to these tests in that the results are semi-quantitative. They indicate the presence and relative strength of the signal, but not exact percentages or concentrations. So based on the water samples we collected in Taranaki, the most widely detected source of contamination, considering the number of samples and the strength of detection, was ruminant livestock, reflecting pastoral land use. Wild birds were also a common contributor, especially in lowland and urban sites. And human contamination was occasionally present, but far less common, suggesting there may be occasional wastewater or stormwater inputs rather than persistent human sources. Disease-causing pathogens were found at most sites, sometimes even when E. coli was below the guideline levels. So just to wrap this up, the findings of this national research program are expected to inform future guideline revisions and provide an evidence base which the Council can draw on when communicating recreational water quality risk to the public, also when assessing contamination events, and to help prioritise investigations. And I'm happy to take questions.
Kia ora, Thomas. Do you have any questions? Neil?
Again, I'd like to just ask a couple of questions. Firstly, one of the things that really I felt was a little bit missing from this particular study, is the fact that we don't have anything which actually indicates how much, say, Campylobacter outbreaks there are, or how many people actually catch it. So I'm a bit troubled by, we say there's a risk here, and yes there is, but nobody swims in Kura Park Lake, and nobody swims in King Edward Park in Hara, which are ducks full and all that kind of thing. So is this the primary risk for those conditions, or not? We're kind of presented in paper and risk, but is the risk the major risk that causes those things? And anyway, how much of this particular illnesses do we really, there's all sorts of speculation saying, percentages and theory, but what figures do we have to actually back that up with what actually is happening?
Through you, Chair. So yeah, that is it's a good point in that reporting when it comes to people becoming ill and presenting to the doctor or going to hospital is really low, and I think commonly underreported, and potentially not always linked back to what the cause of the illness was in the first place. And that's, I guess, a limitation with the information we've got to work with, and hence the approach that's been applied here and the reliance on statistical models and things like that. Yeah.
Yes.
The point being, I guess, is that we know that the biggest Campylobacter outbreak in the country was caused by the contamination in the Hastings area. So getting Campylobacter was really quite serious. So you would think that if there was significant amounts of Campylobacter for people swimming in river holes and all that kind of thing, we would see it.
So the short answer is we just don't know. So they collect information when people report it, and they don't always report it, so not every case is notified. When they do get notified, they don't always track it back to a particular source. So it could be that someone might have eaten something, they might have drunk something, they may have been swimming, but we never generally know for certain exactly where they've contracted it from. So, and of course there's always the chance that someone's contracted it from another person as well. So this is really the best level of information that we have now in the current environment. I don't know that we're ever going to have a clear picture on exactly how many cases there are and exactly how many can be traced back to swimming. What this presents, however, is that there is always a risk, no matter what the level of E. coli is in our rivers, that risk increases with more contaminants. So the higher the level of contamination, the higher the risk both of contracting it and also of getting sick from it directly. The level of risk people are comfortable with is a completely individual decision. So some people might be quite comfortable getting in the river when it's on a red warning sign. Personally, I would not, but that's a personal choice. But what we have now is a clear indication of what those risks are and those levels of risk that we didn't have before. So, did you want to add anything to that, Thomas?
No, I think you covered it well. Thanks, Abby.
Donna?
Thanks. But it was also it was really about the diseases, wasn't it?
Yeah, so
and,
this was
and that
updated.
E. coli testing was relevant.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. So it was, so one of the objectives was to test whether to check whether the E. coli as an indicator was still a relevant indication, which it is. So, yeah.
So you still
for
think that will be
Campylobacter.
the main indicator?
I would suspect a coal mine enterococci will still be our main go-tos, yes.
So there is, I guess, a follow-on piece of work to this nationally to sort of pick it up and revisit the original guidelines and see how the new knowledge here is going to be applied into, if the guidelines will be revised, but certainly I would expect the indicator organisms are likely to remain as they are in terms of E. coli and enterococci.
Where this might flow through to, though, is a revision of the guidance, I guess, that's given through the national, or the requirements that are given through the National Policy Statement for Freshwater.
Do you
as
mean
it currently
around the
stands.
risk?
So through the National Objectives Framework and the levels that are put in that, I suspect that science will inform any revision that they happen to do with that. So, yeah.
Hey, the Taranaki at the bottom was really high at low. Is that just because it's direct bird fowl?
The ducks and the nanas and granddads taking the kids to feed the sodding ducks.
We've heard this before.
Yeah.
Strange childhood memories there, Susan.
No, but it's just a bit interesting because all the others at low are quite low, aren't they? And that one was still quite high.
Go there any afternoon and see Nana and Granddad and the kids.
But it is
How do you mean
fowl.
by low? I'm just not...
Well, so if you look at the others, and I know from our own water testing in our area, that they're really, if there's been no rain, and E. coli levels will be really low, right down to the coast. Whereas that one's at 9:30. It's high as a low, if you get what I mean. And I assume that's from direct bird fowl.
Yeah. So there is a persistent issue with water quality at the Taranaki, at the river mouth there.
Oh, it's
and
just
certainly,
interesting that it's so high. I mean, when you get 24,000 as a maximum, it's been raining, and it's been raining hard, hasn't it? So, that's... But to say this was an indication of where Taranaki is, with the number of samples, because it wasn't... There's only one that was 35 samples, the rest were only 5, or maybe 1 in 50. Yeah, they're quite low sampling.
Yeah, that's right. I guess it tells us about those sites in particular. And of course, the sampling design was such that often sites were selected because there were known levels of E. coli. So it's certainly not like supposed to be a representative picture of the whole. Yeah.
Any more questions? I just have a question about the table on page 19 with the eDNA results and the listing of those DNA results. I'm making an assumption that the eDNA that was mostly found is cattle. So is it in decreasing results, or is it just randomly got cattle at the start of all of those?
So similar to the microbial source tracking results, eDNA is limited in the sense that it doesn't provide a clear quantitative kind of result. You can get an indication of the amount of genetic material across different species or organisms, but it's hard to then relate that back to what you're actually seeing in terms of numbers of animals and things like that. I'd have to go and check the ordering of the table and whether that corresponds to...
Yeah, that might be interesting to know, because then my other question is around the table 1 on page 15, when the observed local dominant contaminant source for most of those areas is from the dairy industry. So how will these results relate to other parts of the work around trying to reduce the potential for those contaminations from the industry?
Yeah, look, I think for the sites that have been included in the study, there is a lot of really useful information there. We've tried to summarise and package up in this item, but there's lots that we can do with that and support the work that we've already been doing to just try and better understand the issues in different catchments around the region. So yeah, there's lots more work that we can do with this for sure.
Thank you. And just in light of the conversation we had this morning in the other meeting and the strength of the dairying industry to want to fix things like this, I'm sure there'll be some clear pathways forward. So thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Tukia?
Yeah, just a comment really, I guess, following from what you were saying, Benita. But yeah, this research is good, I guess, in just showing that there is ruminant fecal matter in our waterways, and it does appear to be the dominant one. So hopefully, I mean, this is all politics around how we protect our waterways, right? And whether we should allow the stock to be able to do what they do. But yeah, this is good evidence, I guess, to show that stock is the main culprit here, and we need to do something. Thank you.
Donna, back to you.
I was just going to say, but I mean, the wildfowl is going to get worse, isn't it? I know of 4 wetlands that are going to be restored or constructed round our way. So we've got to accept that the wildfowl is actually going to get worse, isn't it?
But it's natural.
No, the number of... Yeah, well, I'm just saying that this isn't going to go away, is it? I mean, is it, as biodiversity increases and how are we going to...
So
it's a bit of an interest... I'm just stating a fact, aren't I?
It's an interesting conundrum. We're always going to have levels to some degree. How we prioritise addressing those is a question that would need to be grappled with, I think, around this table as we work through planning and policy development. Human sources are always the biggest risk to people, and addressing those as a priority goes the furthest to protecting human health. That's not to say that we shouldn't be addressing the others as well, but they're a broader region-wide problem as opposed to some targeted things that we could be doing around human sources. So I think there's probably some work for us to do with the policy team once we get some further national direction in terms of what we can be doing and how we start addressing those things. But there are opportunities through farm planning and through the development of the plan as that comes forward in terms of supporting those actions to improve it and reduce discharges as best we can. But yeah, thinking about those priorities I think is key in terms of actually making an impact that's going to have the best outcomes for human health.
Fine, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Can I have a mover, please, for the recommendations on page 12 that we received the memo and note the findings herein? Thank you. Donna and Susan, all in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, team. We are at get my agenda back. Spatial planning overview. Over to you, Thunder.
Thank you.
And we've got a presentation coming.
Yes. Right, through you, Chair. Thank you. I'll take the first bit. It's pretty short. The main topic of today is this presentation, which as the work on the regional spatial plan begins to ramp up, as we get more and more clarity gradually about the legislative regime, this is to talk to you today about 3 things. What the kind of evolving framework looks like in the Act and kind of drawing on other spatial plans. I've got an example in there that is to give you an idea of kind of what a spatial plan can kind of look like actually when you've got the document in your hand, just at least one small section. And then finally some material about the process from here and to give you a bit of fun facts about the context to indicate the scale of the work. So, the framework. So, what's in a spatial plan? This is bit on what's in the legislation, but just generally our kind of intuition on how these things work. The full document you can kind of imagine in these different chunks. You open it up and first you've got the lovely material about the context of the region, key facts and figures, socio-economic, environmental data, and also, importantly, the big issues that you're facing as a region that you're wanting the spatial plan to try and address. Then you usually get into a section that provides, you usually have kind of like an overarching vision for the region, and then flowing out of that region a number of specific priorities indicating the areas that you really want to focus on in a spatial plan. And you can think of the spatial plan as kind of like the 30-year land use and resource management strategy for the region. And like in any good strategy, it should tell you as much about what you're not going to do than what you are going to do, and that's where those priorities are really important. Then you get into the fun part, which is the maps. So you would usually have a section of what I've quite banally called now maps. These are describing your region as it is now. So, you know, current housing areas, natural hazards that you know about, areas of significant natural areas, that kind of stuff. And then you get future maps, which are, you take all that information about the now and your priorities and you turn them into maps that show where you want your region to go in the future. Where do you want to develop housing? Where do you want to encourage certain industries? Where are big infrastructure investments needed? Where might you be wanting to invest in biodiversity corridors throughout the region and things like that? And then finally, and really importantly, it's not just pretty maps and words, well, these are words, it's not just pretty maps. The spatial plan should also have specific actions. So what are councils, government, stakeholders, iwi, the community going to do to help realise the vision that you've put in those future maps? I'm gonna very quickly here, so within the context itself, this is just summarising, again, we've been over this before, planning bill, district council stuff, natural environmental bill, regional council stuff, but we all come together, the four councils, to play nicely and develop this regional spatial plan together. And to provide a bit of importantly, the regional spatial plan is a document that has legal weight, which is really important. Currently, spatial plans don't. And how that legal weight works is, again, so you've got the spatial plan kind of setting out the why and the what, the big issues, what you're going to do about them. For example, future growth areas, future infrastructure needs, that kind of stuff. In terms of how it has legal weight, though the spatial plan informs the land use and natural environment plans, so those are your bread and butter consenting, right? Like, what's a permitted activity, what requires a consent, what hoops do you have to jump through to do what kind of things. And so your land use and natural environment plans have to be consistent with the spatial plan. And then importantly, really importantly as well, is your long-term plan and your regional land transport plans also have to be broadly consistent with the spatial plan. So that actually gives you money to do things in the spatial plan, which is really important. Again, many spatial plans around the country at the moment kind of fall down as that you have all these wonderful actions that you're going to do, but then it's really hard to actually finance them. However, things do flow back the other way because your actions that you do have to be informed by the financial realities of your region and other things. So like your long-term plan also informs the spatial plan, but not quite as strongly, if that makes sense. And this is just focused on councils. It should also be that the likes of NZTA or Transpower or iwi or community or industry or business should be able to pick up the spatial plan and go, okay, I can see how what I want to do makes sense and fits within this. But, and I'm going to go out on a limb, and it's probably unlikely that the government will write something into the legislation that says our spatial plans have legal weight on their decision making. That seems probably a bit of a stretch, but you never know. So what could a spatial plan look like in practice? I've got an example here drawing from the draft Sydney spatial plan, which we've heard is being looked at as a bit of a model. So again, you have the overall structure of it mirrors what I said before. You've got your priorities, and then you've got what they term responses, and you can have like one response that deals with multiple priorities. It's a bit convoluted. But again, importantly, specific actions to realise the priorities. So what's an example? Let's look at housing and where you want to put houses. So this is, you go, all right, we should probably understand where people live in your region. So this is a map of population density in Sydney. But where you want to put housing should also be aligned with your existing transport infrastructure. So you have a nice map about your transport infrastructure, what are your key bits of airports, roads, rail, that kind of stuff. But we don't want to put houses where people might be exposed to natural hazards. So you include a map about your natural hazard information. Where's flooding risk? In this case, where's wildfire risk? And then finally, you also need to be conscious of your biodiversity landscape in terms of you don't want to be ripping out an important bit of biodiversity to build houses, but also they can offer some nice amenity values if they're relatively nearby and accessible. And then you throw that all into the kind of policy sausage maker and a bunch of other information that will never make it into your spatial plan. And you get something like this, which is the areas where we have the highest growth capacity and where we want to encourage housing development across your region. So you get the kind of sense about how those now maps flow through into a future map of what you want to do in your region. Of course, ours will look very different. We're not Sydney, and we have different issues. So what's the process from here for the spatial plan? This is us. This might change. All of this might change because it's subject to the select committee process that's going through at the moment. But this is what's in the bills at the moment, and us assuming the bills get royal assent in September, so running right up to the wire for when the House rises for the election. So they've got a fair bit of work to do. From there, you would get the national direction that you need to do parts of your spatial plan. There's still stuff you can do before that, kind of over the first half of 2027. And then you have to be publicly notifying your spatial plan by the end of 2027, and then 6 months later you have an operative spatial plan. This is a very compressed timeline. It's been a consistent bit of feedback throughout the select committee process that this is a bit much. So we might see a little bit of give as they go through the House, but I would expect probably 6 months tops. But that 6 months would be welcome. So we've got to do a spatial plan. What do the bills say about how we actually do it? The big one is that for us, the 4 councils have to establish a spatial planning committee. So a committee of the 4 councils that does the legwork in terms of the governance oversight of the policy development and engagement for the spatial plan. You have an independent hearings panel who runs the actual hearings process and then makes recommendations back. And really importantly, the decisions to notify the spatial plan and adopt the final spatial plan still rest with each full council. So the spatial planning committee makes recommendations back to council. Essentially what this committee does in terms of making recommendations back to full council to notify, because you can't delegate your ability to notify a plan. And to make this all happen seamlessly, the 4 councils have to sign a process agreement. This happens before you set up the spatial planning committee, and it basically codifies how you're going to play nicely in the sandpit, how you're going to engage with iwi, how you're going to engage with communities, what are the big key priority areas for your region you want the spatial plan to focus on. And we're starting to shape that up at the moment. Again, this slide is just to give you a sense. This is about marine spatial planning, but it's the similar process. Emphasising that a lot goes into a spatial plan, and it shouldn't be a document that you just finish and put on the shelf. It is a process of continuous review for these kind of things. 30 years is an insane period of time to plan for. I ask you all just to put your mind back 30 years and what's changed since then. And there'll be many things that we cannot anticipate. But you have a go, it informs your direction, and then you're regularly reviewing it to update to changing circumstance. And then how big of a job is this? So putting aside, well, there's a lot. So 3 mayors, 1 chair and 48 councillors that ideally you're keeping happy throughout this process. 10 iwi authorities to engage with. You've actually got to have meaningful community and industry and business and engagement throughout this process, which will be hard in the timelines that we currently have, but we'll do it best we can. My back of the envelope list, I came up with 18 or so infrastructure providers that you'd be wanting to talk to. That ranges from your NZTAs to your telcos to your Ministry of Education and Building Skills. We've got 4 councils to coordinate across to fund this thing in terms of long-term plans and annual plans and just resourcing and setting that up. you've got to do, there's no detail on how you actually do this yet, but it sounds like it's probably quite important. You've got to do scenario planning and trend analysis. Trend analysis, we know what to do. We don't really know what they mean by scenario planning yet. We'll wait for some further detail. Our initial stock takers identified 78 GIS layers that we've got to wrap our heads around and kind of factor into our analysis. And probably most importantly, we do just have some pretty big issues in Taranaki that we've got to grapple with in the spatial plan and the opportunity it provides to do that. Be that the environmental issues that have been the bread and butter of this council for a long time, or emerging issues around the somewhat perilous state of our local economy and some of the pressures going on there. So what can we do now while we're still in this, as we're in this phase of getting gradually more certainty on what the legislation says? We can begin work on the process agreement. We've got a fair idea about that and what's required. There's a lot of relationships we need to build. We need to start making those networks across the 4 councils with the likes of the infrastructure providers and working with Potaio and iwi on how we work together on this stuff. We can get a really good handle on our current context as a region in terms of socio-economic and environmental data. And then there's some no regrets policy work we can kind of chip away with, like the energy work we've been doing. And then finally, with regards to all those GIS layers, particularly for the ones that are housed by the 3 district councils, there's a bunch of work we need to do to align those, make sure they kind of talk nicely and they're interoperable. So that's the end of the presentation. Happy to take any questions. There will be, I'm sure, more presentations like this in the future and more detail as we get it, but hopefully that gives you an idea of kind of the breadth of what we're steering down over the next few years.
So Finbar, the only other piece I think is important for the committee to be aware of is, under the current timelines, it's about 9 months between the national direction becoming available and us being required to have a spatial plan ready to be adopted. Spatial plan, certainly my practical experience with it is probably about a 5-year journey to do it properly. We're going to do that in 9 months. So we need to be very realistic about what can actually be achieved in the first plan. It is not going to be the ideal approach of extensive community and iwi engagement and all the rest of it. It's going to have to be very pragmatic, given those statutory limitations. So, and now obviously this is an issue we've flagged in our submission to the subcommittee, but just to be very clear about the constraints we are expecting. Well, hopefully some of that will change, but under the current bills, the constraints we're going to be working with are going to be very real, very compressed. This will be modified what we already have. It's not going to be idealistic, bottom up. Good processes. As I said, my practical experience doing this, good 5 years at least. But we're not going to have that. We're going to have 9 months. Hence why actually starting these conversations now, ahead of the legislation, is also incredibly important. That we start working these things out now and starting to make some progress on it.
Kia ora, thanks. Steve, that's very terrifying. Lead him.
Thank you, Selena, through you. Given that, I'll park my dream of major community engagement. I will instead ask, though, about whether or not that first initial plan really considers those high-level trade-offs that have to happen, if you understand what I mean, like that we can't have a plan that doesn't accept that that plan has a trade-off and what that... Am I making any sense?
Well,
like, you know, that...
Yeah, there are going to be trade... Well, that's one of the points. There are going to be trade-offs not driven purely by planning, because again, spatial planning, as Finbar says, has to link back into LTPs. What we know of LTPs is we're going to have rates capping that will struggle to pay for inflation. We know we already have, and if you read the National Infrastructure Plan, major infrastructure deficits across New Zealand, and government plans that do not align with fundings available in the system. That is going to be a real constraint on what can actually be included in a spatial plan in terms of where growth and changes may be possible.
Through you, Chair.
Sounds like a very hard job.
Just to add to that, one of the biggest trade-offs we'll face due to the compressed timelines and our resourcing constraints is what do we focus on? There will be many aspects of the spatial plan which, to be frank, will be fairly slapdash. But we have an opportunity to kind of work through, well, where are the big opportunities and where do we focus on first and what do we pick up when we revisit it down the line?
Just a question. So what's the cycle of revisiting it, improving it as we go forward?
Through you, Chair. So the full kind of process at the moment is spatial plan, you do that, you jump back to whatever it was, and then after that will be boots and all into land use and natural environment plans, which are like the consenting detail stuff. And then the way I've been kind of describing it is almost, so currently in the bills you don't have to review, you review your spatial plan every 10 years. If we get these timelines, the way to view it is your first spatial plan is an interim spatial plan, and then you're picking it up straight away once you've finished your land use and natural environment plans. And then that's actually the full cycle for the first time. But that's 2029, 2030 under the current timelines, which you'd have capacity to pick it back up.
Okay, so we'll go to Mitch, then Craig, and then back to Tuhiao. Kia ora, Mitch. Ka reno ki a rongo.
Okay.
Oh, ka
Sorry,
pai.
it's not working. I'll have to come back.
No, can hear you now.
You can't hear us.
Oh, ka pai. All right, we'll go to Craig, and then we'll go back to Tuhiao, and hopefully Mitch can.
Thanks, Chair. So, given these timelines and the scope of this work, how much of this folds in and can run, I guess, in parallel or in conjunction with the reurbanisation planning and also the RMA stuff, which both have very short time frames, sort of seem to cross over as well?
Through you, Chair. Too soon to tell, probably. I think for now, our general approach is they're separate. You run them at the moment.
Sorry, I'm not able to hear anybody. If you guys can hear me.
All right, ka pai, we can hear you. I'll come back to you, Whananga. Yeah, I'll come back to you.
Okay, ka pai. So there's just a couple of questions from me, and the more around the constraints that were being discussed earlier. So first and foremost, there's the Te Kāhui Tupua. So at this stage, we're not too sure what the impact of that's going to be and how it's going to influence or maybe not influence the new system. The second one is probably in relation to sites of significance. I know that MPDC have done quite an extensive amount of work in being able to identify waihi tapuin sites of significance, but the same amount of work possibly... No, I can't hear you guys, sorry. There's something just happened with my my audio, but in terms of that, I'm not too sure where South Taranaki District Council are and Stratford District Council are and being able to identify those sites in the same way, because that's going to be a real important matter when we come to spatial planning. And if there are capability issues within council that means they're unable to gather that information, then that needs to be considered within the creation of the spatial plan, and knowing that if they aren't identified, how does that inform decision making in relation to spatial planning? And the third one was just around layers. So you mentioned Finbar, GIS layers. My understanding is that there are some discrepancies between layers that DOC hold and settlement layers. So again, that will need to be taken into consideration. So just raising these as items to be aware of as we move through this very rapid process.
Can you see my
Now I'll try and get my sound sorted.
Right. Through you, Chair. Should I respond now, even though we might not be able to hear? Just quickly on those, on Te Kāhui Tupua, that's something that we're very live to. That will be a really important thing for the spatial plan. And it's something we're keen to have discussions on when the time is right. With regards to sites of significance, also something we've got on our work program to tackle. Some work has been done in the context of our freshwater plan that was looking at how we approach Stratford and South Taranaki, where there is less identification. And we're hoping some of that methodology might apply to the spatial plan. On that, one thing which we're still working through is what goes in the spatial plan and what goes in the land use and natural environment plans, because a spatial plan doesn't have rules associated with it. It doesn't have thou shalt not do. That comes later. And so there will be, we're trying to work through what that looks like for both sites of significance and for significant natural areas. So we're aware it's a complicated piece, and good to know about DOC and the settlement layers, so we'll note that down, we'll look into it.
So Lisa's just advised that we'll get those responses back to Mitch, so he's aware of what that question was. If we can come back to Craig I've forgotten what the question was now.
Yeah, that's right.
How it all intertwines with
that's right.
reorganisation plans at RMA.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. At the moment, we're kind of thinking run them separate, look for opportunities to align and reassess as you go through. The big difference is this is something we'll have to do as a region for the resource management space. There are more discussions to be had about the reorganisation stuff amongst the councils on how that's approached. And the timelines will be different too, so we just need to be aware of that.
Related but parallel.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Tuhiao.
Yeah, kia ora. Just to talk about what Mitch said first. I guess one thing I'm curious about this is how this fits in with climate planning, because I can see the NPDC have got a cope-up of this Thursday in one of their meetings, and they've kind of mentioned that they're hoping that this regional spatial plan will cover some of their climate adaptation and resilience planning. So curious to just see how realistic that is. But also just wondering if we are able to get some of the presentations and things that are sent out to these community and stakeholder hui and provide some feedback in their own time, or maybe come along to the meetings and just have a listen, if that's helpful.
Through you, Chair, on the climate question, so what's in the bills at the moment is the spatial plan has to identify areas in your region that require dedicated adaptation planning. So the spatial plan kind of does a pass over the region and say, these are our vulnerable communities that you need to do adaptation planning for, but we're still waiting the legislation that tells you actually how to do that. So the spatial plan should at least at the minimum do that with regards to those work streams. And sorry, I didn't quite catch the question about the presentation.
Maybe just on that first one, so it's more around the risks and effects rather than transition and resilience with the spatial plan, is that right?
Yes. It's a bit of both. So you have to put out your natural hazard information, and that needs to factor in climate change. But yeah, the big keystone thing in the moment in the bills is identifying where adaptation planning is required.
Yeah.
For specific communities at a community scale.
Yeah, so sort of the effects, not the impact. Yeah. So yeah, the other bit was just about whether we can contribute to some of these hui that are being arranged, like the energy ones that just happened. Like, yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
Cool.
Any other questions? Donna, did you have a question?
It's just no regrets policy. What does that mean?
Through you, Chair, that's the policy that we think has the policy work that has the least. Either it's really, really important, and we got to start thinking about it, or it has very low risk of being modified as the bills and the national direction goes through the process.
So we're starting work without clarity on what we're going to be required to do, so it may be wrong.
Yeah.
All right.
So
no hindsight regrets.
Sorry?
Plan though, didn't we?
Sorry?
We always, through you, Chief. We did always intend to do a spatial plan, like it's been, we've been talking about it for a long time.
Yes, we have, yes. So hopefully the risk is low, but so it's a pragmatic decision about, rather than rush everything in something like a 9-month time frame, it'll take a third of that time just to get agreement on a regional spatial planning committee in a process amongst 4 councils, I'd suggest. You'll lose a third of it if you wait. So that's why start now, but know it may not be perfect, and do make some judgments about the approach we need to adopt in the absence of perfect information, which is also reality. even once we have legislation. 2 months ago, we didn't completely contemplate the Iran war and the impacts it's having on our economy today. So that's the world today.
Pananga, Denny?
Thank you for the report. A couple of partai. In terms of the Spatial Planning Committee, of the 4 councils, who decides who's on that committee? Is it the respective councils? How many per council that are, so what's the number of the spatial committee?
Sorry, just coming back, there is obviously statutory provisions applying to appointment of committee members in the case of the TLAs,
right,
which is different to the statutory provisions that applies to the regional council.
Okay.
Obviously, the mayor has powers in the TLA, the chair does not have those same powers in a regional council.
So to clarify, would that be led then through the respective mayors in terms of the spatial planning committee?
It will follow whatever, yes, would be my, and look, I'm not up on the process that all 3 councils in fact, I don't know fully the process that all 3 TLAs follow, so, but the Act certainly provides for the mayor to appoint membership of committee, and then there's obviously provision in the Act for the full council to do something different if they wish to do something different, but that's quite a different process to regional councils where it needs to be a council resolution.
Cool. In terms of the 10 iwi authorities, I'm picking Maniapoto as one of them. Who's the other one?
Te Tupuri Ngarahu. So under the Maunga settlement, Te Tupuri Ngarahu is to be treated as an iwi authority for the purposes of the Resource Management Act. So we're assuming that carries forward into the new regime.
Thank you for that clarity. And in terms of, obviously, with the risks that could come with regards to ever-changing information, how is there going to be a framework for us as we navigate there, a risk register or anything like that with the demand that's coming from central government? How do we as respective councils be updated on things that are incoming or transitioning or otherwise? Is that something that's going to be in consideration as part of this?
Through you, Chair, within that process agreement we have to sign, one area where we think, it's not in the bills, but we think it would be really useful, and we're doing some work at the moment, is looking at ways we can design that process agreement to reduce the risk of any disagreements happening and resolve them if they do. And that kind of stuff falls within the, what are the extra steps we can put in place to help minimise the risk of wires getting crossed and people getting unhappy. And part of that will be codifying how, so we'll have this spatial planning committee that the minutes will go back to each council, but how do you actually ensure that knowledge is properly transferred? So we're about to set that out in that agreement.
Probably my final question is probably just an awareness piece too. As such, and because the region will be dealing with the spatial planning, one thing that's often not spoken about, but I think there should be some serious considerations. You mentioned about current and future maps, but a lot of the historical maps that are also out there also highlight some of the historical grievances that still exist within Taranaki. Land that was confiscated and still hasn't had the ability to go through a process of return through the Public Works Act. And I think if you're looking at development, infrastructure, future-proofing our communities, well, there's also that other piece that often gets lost when you merge it from particular districts into a region-wide spatial planning. So there are parcels of land just in the New Plymouth district alone that have been confiscated through the Public Works Act and has sit dormant. And there's been no process yet to return that back to the rightful owners. So just a point to consider when we're navigating through this. There are also some unresolved historical matters that also need to be addressed as part of the spatial plan.
Kia ora. Ka pai. Any other questions or partai comments? I just have a few, Finbar, if you'll indulge me.
Please.
Thank you, Dinny, for those kōrero, because I had noted on my questions too around treaty issues, historical issues, making sure we're all over those, especially those historical issues which are very real and still alive within our whānau, hapu and iwi circles. And really questioning iwi involvement at the outset, not later on as an interested party, or how often is or at what point does the iwi voice get brought into this establishment phase, I guess is what I'm asking. So that's the first question.
Through you, Chair, ideally now. So you'll be aware of the arrangement we have around that was supporting the freshwater work and the potaia in that space, acknowledging that the plan pause, there's a discussion to be had about how we refocus that agreement in terms of supporting the development of the spatial plan, which is a big opportunity. In terms of some of the mana whakahana arohi that have been initiated, that's also another opportunity to kind of codify kind of what would go into the process agreement also, almost, in terms of how you would engage with iwi. And we're very conscious of wanting to set up a discussion with potaia in particular around just how we ensure engagement is appropriate, well targeted and kind of safe.
Kapai, thank you. The Hearings Committee members, the independent Hearings Committee members, will be made up of who? How will they be selected?
Through you, Chair, I think you found a question I don't know off the top of my head in the bills. I would have to go away and check, sorry.
Yeah, because that would sort of make RMA commissioners a bit redundant because it's not about the RMA anymore, is it? So that would be interesting to know, and whether or not there's a process by which this council can nominate people who could be considered for that committee, or any council might like to nominate. So that would be really helpful to know sooner rather than later.
Through you, Chair, at risk of being wrong, I think it's a mix of both. Most of them are appointed from a pool,
okay,
and then I think there might be the option of the councils to chuck on one or two, but I'll go away and confirm.
Kapai, thank you. And just around my last question, you mentioned the so this is like a high level, dare I say it, aspirational document, right? So as Steve mentioned, there are no rules. This is setting out the intention for the rohe. In the meantime, around gaps, the potential gaps that we know will exist, having to hone in on the stuff that we can do and can achieve, what, if any, legal risks or implication might that put on our councils across the rohe in some tricky situations? We're still going to be relying on legislation as sits, but will there be any crossovers and gaps, loopholes that may come out of this process?
Good question. Through you, Chair, I'll break that into two parts. First, around the it's probably a bit more than a strategy. It does have legal weight. Teresa described it well the other day. It's policy on a map, okay, not rules on a map, or strategy and policy on a map. So there is, it's a bit more than that, we think, based on the bills. To the other point, so in the transitional arrangements that are in the bills at the moment, the spatial plan, that's a good question actually, sorry. Generally, the full regime doesn't switch until you've done your spatial plan and your land use and environment plans. That's like 2029, 2030 under the current timeframes. However, I'm conscious, I wonder if you've got your spatial plan, whether that immediately has to be taken into account in LTPs and things like that.
Yeah.
So I'll go away and check that.
That would be really helpful to know. Yeah. Kapai, thank you. And those were my questions for the day.
The spatial plan is not going to be adopted until after the LTP. It's 27 LTP. Sure. So it'll be the next one after that it has to have regard to. But realistically, it can't be enforceable in an LTP sense, because you'll create an even bigger problem that already exists about financial sustainability provisions interacting and all the rest of it. So this is still some of the stuff that's at the heart of the relationship between the pieces of legislation. Rates capping the policy advice to Treasury was very clear. You haven't thought about how rates capping interacts with the financial sustainability provisions in the Local Government Act, or even things like going concern, for from an accounting standards perspective.
Going concern, that's it.
So actually, those are issues that are all flagged in submissions, and the submissions that were lodged, the next Audit and Risk Committee has copies of the submissions that were lodged by Te Kahika and Taituara on the rates capping piece, just to bring that committee up to speed with some of these issues, because that interaction has not been thought about in the policy work, and it is a clear gap that needs to be addressed before you could create a hard link between what's in fact, I don't think you would create a hard link between what's in the spatial plan and what's in your LTB, because you'll take away a big limitation of what you can, a lever you can pull to live within the financial constraints of rates capping. It just doesn't, they can't do it. So, yeah, but as I said, they're still very clunky, that stuff. The policy strings haven't been linked in the development process.
Yeah, and I would assume that the same sort of questions would then arise too for our district councils around the validity and the life of their district plan. Things like that as well.
The issues for a district council are much worse than they are for a regional council, because while two waters is going off to water service entities or in-house and exempt from rates capping, all of their other infrastructure is still very much included, including roading, which is a really big issue in rural and provincial New Zealand. But also community infrastructure, community facilities. Those are going to look very different. LTPs, roading works programs, and this LTP are going to look very different to what they had looked in the past if you're operating with an assumption of 2% rate increase.
Hence my
That's
question
not
around
even covering
liabilities
inflation,
and legalities.
let alone oil price has a big impact on the amount of roading you can do. You know, bitumen is critical to road rehab, reseal type work. That's big money and roading programs. That is going to have that. Last oil crisis a few years ago, districts cut their roading, reseal, rehab programs to live within the pool of money they had available. The same will have to happen in this LTP, depending on where this oil crisis issue goes.
But that's not even including any litigation that comes from any developers that decide that councils have prevented works in some way, shape or form in these bills, eh?
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Can I ask, I really appreciate the indicative timeline. Can we make sure that's consistent in these updates, and even if it's just what's going to happen over the next 3 months, just so there's some really good clarity?
Yep.
Cool. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, and this relates, so over time, more and more of the spatial planning stuff will move into the kind of the planning update that Anne delivered earlier, so we can make sure that's included in that.
Deep breath, Whānau.
Very good.
Interesting times. Any other comments or... Mayor Phil, you got any reflections at this point in time?
Watch out for the potholes. The ones to come. Yeah, look, I mean, I guess my comment would be this sort of legislation with spatial planning is like so much of it at the moment, and Steve's alluded that we need to get on and do a bit, but we have to be prepared for change, because too much of it, we're trying to build the plane while we're flying it. And I mean, it's the world we're living in, it is what it is, and the government keeps throwing this at us, but we've got so many balls in the air with so much of this at the moment that it is making life very difficult. But we can only do what we can do. We can only start a lot of this work and predict it as best we can at this stage. But it's certainly uncertain times in so many ways of what we're doing, and so it's difficult for officers, it's difficult for elected members, it's yeah.
And if it's difficult for us, you can imagine how confused the public are.
Absolutely.
We're supposed to be the experts, so.
Yep, and I mean that really came out in local water done well. I mean, it took a lot for us to get our heads around what we were doing and how we were doing it, and then to try and inform the public, to give them the ammunition they needed for an informed decision was very hard. And now we're replicating it time and time again. So yeah, you did right, Chair.
Ka pai. Kia kaha tātou. Good luck to us all. Okay, any other comments or questions to Finbar regarding item 7? Can I then please have a mover and a seconder that we receive the memo and note the presentation is attached? Thank you, Donna. Seconder. Thank you, Phil. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Carried, thank you. Kia ora. And over to you again, Whamba, Taranaki VTM project update.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. I'll keep this brief. I'll take the paper as read and I'll just emphasise 3 things. First, our overall approach as we entered into this application in terms of positioning ourselves as an impartial provider of advice to the panel has worked pretty well, I think. A lot of the advice we provided was carried through into the decision, which is nice to see. However, I also just want to acknowledge the huge role that iwi played in this process. You'll see from that decision the inconsistency with treaty settlements and matters and cultural matters was a significant part of the decision, and I was witness to the memos that were in minutes that were flying around, and some of the timelines and information requests that were put on iwi throughout this process were very intense, and they don't have the resources of a whole council backing them up to deliver it. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Kia ora.
And then finally, and this relates to a matter I talked about briefly last time, we've looked into it, and I'm going to use the word likely because it's all law and you never really know what someone might challenge. But our interpretation is that because they've withdrawn the application and no decision was issued, it technically still remains a listed application under the Act, so they could lodge another substantive application in the future, skipping the referral process that any new fresh application has to go through. Whether they do that or not, of course, I'm not going to speculate, but we'll see.
Well, paragraph 9 of the council's submission makes it abundantly clear that that's precisely what they're going to do.
That was short and I won't call it sweet, but short and informative. Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Whamba? I have a question, Whamba. So if the application is relodged, as you mentioned, it can... Sorry, what was the terminology? It doesn't have to...
It would be lodged as a substantive application. So the process is, if you're not a listed at one on the bill, you have to go through a referral process, which you apply to the minister and they give you the thumbs up or thumbs down, and then you make a substantive application to the EPA. So they get to probably skip that first process if they try again.
As a party who has been involved in the last application, do we get automatic notification and rights of participation in any new application?
Through you, Chair. So there has been some changes to the bill, to the Act since they last applied. So we would still be almost certainly a relevant local authority. Interestingly, the big change that they've made is the most recent amendment to the Act inserted a clause which the intent is to provide less scope for inviting parties that are not listed. So the listed parties are like relevant local authorities, relevant iwi and hapa and Crown agencies and stuff, and neighbours, property owners. A provision's been added to the Act where before the panel invites submissions from, say, Greenpeace would fall into this category, they first have to approach the relevant local authorities and get our feedback on what we're going to comment on. Oh. And then they have to take that into account before they invite other panel people to participate. So they might ask us, hey, Regional Council, what are you going to comment on? And we'd say probably the same things we commented on last time. And then that might lead them to need to make a decision to not invite some third parties into the process, but hard to know what it would look like in practice.
And a new application would need a new panel?
Yes.
Which would need us being able to nominate potential people for that panel again?
Correct.
Precluding the last panel members who've already been through the process? Correct. Okay.
So they couldn't go through it again?
It would have to be different people, yes, absolutely. Jonathan?
That's through you, Chair. Would it be possible that if they did go through another process that they could withdraw at some point in time to put, once again, their application just in a waiting situation?
Through you, Chair, yes, I think so. I mean, as far as I can tell, there's no timeline, so they can just bide their time. The only risk would be change in the Act to remove them as a listed. That, I'm sure, has lots of legal consequences and risk, but beyond my pay grade.
What they've effectively done is avoid an adverse finding.
Yeah.
So the whole thing remains live because they've simply parked it. And if you look at paragraph 9 of their lawyer's memorandum, that they're saying that the panel got it all wrong anyway, which would add further grist to that particular mill. And there has to be a risk of a piece of legislation that simply skips over the whole process and grants them the ability to do as they wish.
Are there any indications, or is anyone hearing any whispers about that happening? The potential for new legislation to be introduced just to allow them to do what they want to do? Okay, leader.
Can I just ask a really stupid question on behalf of the taxpayer? Who pays for all this stuff?
Through you, Chair.
Great question.
So from a council perspective, one of the great improvements of this fast track legislation over the COVID-19 faster track is that councils can cost recover from the applicant. So we lodge receipts with the EPA, who cost recover it from the applicant on our behalf. There is minor cost recovery provisions for iwi and hapu engaged in the process, but it's not much. So it is, some of the commentary about the fast track so far has been, it might be relatively fast, but it's not cheap.
Yeah, so, and then the actual panel itself, is that paid for by the taxpayer?
Paid for by the applicant. It's fully cost recovered ratio.
Okay, good.
Was there a limit on how much we could recover though?
Through you, Chair, we haven't gone into it yet.
Okay.
We're still, but I think we've still got some invoices outstanding, so we will see. I'd say the EPA is still feeling through that process, and again, one of the amendments that were made to the Act was the ability to be more prescriptive in regulations about what you can and can't cost recover, so we can expect that as some more detail at some point in the future.
And that will come back to us, no doubt, in the future report. Thank you, Finbar. Any other comments or questions? We're going back to you. Okay, can I please have a mover and a seconder that we received the memo, note that the application has been withdrawn, and note that it remains as a listed project. Oh, I like this wording, and can likely lodge a new substantive application directly with the EPA. I have a mover? Craig, thank you. Seconder? Thank you, Susan. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Any against? That's carried. Kia ora tātou. Thank you. That's the end of our hui. So we'll move to closing karakia. All right, online? Awesome. Ka pai. Kia uru mai, ahau ora, ahau kaha, ahau maia, ki runga, ki rato, ki roto, ki waho, rire hau, hai mariri, kia ora. And karakia mo te kai, nau mai e ngā hua, o te wao, o te ngā kina, o te wai tai, o te wai Māori, ngā tāne, ngā rongo, ngā tangaroa, ngā maru, ko ranginui e tui o nei, ko papatoa nuku e takato ake nei, tūturu ōpiti whakamaua kia tīna, hui e, tai e. Kia ora, Mitch. Kia ora, everybody. Here it goes.